The public is conditioned to watch the sky. They are being trained to anticipate a kinetic exchange. Missiles, aircraft, the familiar architecture of 20th century war. This is a deliberate strategic misdirection. The kinetic cost of a symmetric conflict is mathematically prohibitive. The real leverage is asymmetric. The primary vector of attack is not explosive. It is silent. The objective is not to level a building, but to sever the digital nervous system of the global economy. This vulnerability is not an oversight. It is a designated systemic liability. As documented by War on the Rocks, America's cyber weakness is self-inflicted, a known unmitigated condition. Analysts at RUSI and CSIS have mapped these catastrophic points of failure for years. 97% of intercontinental data transmission, including trillions in daily financial settlements, flows through a handful of these undersea cables. A precise physical severance at a key node is not a cyber attack. It is a physical act with digital consequences, a global liquidity event triggered by enforced silence. The second prong of this silent vector targets low Earth orbit, strategic blinding of satellite communications and GPS. Without data from the seafloor and without positioning from orbit, the American state apparatus becomes a blind leviathan, immense unparalleled power rendered inert, thrashing without direction. This is the engineered pretext for the systemic reset. Not a war for territory, but a solvency crisis by design. The primary motive is not geopolitical dominance. It is systemic solvency. The architecture of the Western financial system is predicated on a mathematical impossibility: infinite growth on a finite planet fueled by unpayable debt. A 157-year-old bank confirms the core liability. The US dollar is intentionally and significantly overvalued. This is not an error. It is a feature designed to delay a terminal liquidity crisis. The system requires a reset vector, an external shock severe enough to justify rewriting the rules of the entire monetary game. However, a full-scale kinetic conflict is no longer a viable option for initiating such a reset. The kinetic cost is too high. As RUSI analysis on Russia's campaign in Ukraine demonstrates, prolonged, unpopular wars create catastrophic domestic liabilities. They drain national reserves, fracture political consensus, and risk systemic blowback against the ruling establishment. A state facing a solvency crisis cannot afford a protracted, symmetrical war. Weakness forces a pivot. The solution is to engineer a conflict with a limited kinetic footprint, but a maximum asymmetric blowback. The target must be an adversary capable of a non-conventional response. The political justification must be prepackaged and internationally sanctioned. As confirmed by reports, the EU's sudden pivot to label Iran's IRGC a terror organization is this exact political lubricant. It is not about justice. It is about providing the legal and political top cover for future strikes, making a limited military action palatable to allied populations. This framework reveals the objective. The goal of strikes on Iran is not to achieve victory in the Persian Gulf. It is to trigger a predictable launch-on-warning retaliation from Tehran. This response will not be symmetrical, carrier group versus carrier group. It will be asymmetric, targeting the two designated impact zones, the overvalued dollar and the nation's self-inflicted cyber weakness. The engineered vulnerability guarantees the desired effect, a crisis on the homeland that provides the mandate for a systemic reset that was politically impossible just weeks before. The core mathematical certainty driving the next crisis is not in the stock market. It's in the kinetic cost. The Royal United Services Institute, or RUSI, has laid bare the lethality to cost ratio. A state-of-the-art main battle tank represents a capital asset of approximately $5 million. In contrast, the first-person view drone that targets and neutralizes it can be assembled for $500. This is a 10-to-1 cost disparity. It renders entire legacy military doctrines fiscally insolvent on the modern battlefield. This imbalance is the engine of what analysts term the democratization of violence. Lethality, once the exclusive domain of state-level industrial power, is now a commodity. It grants asymmetric leverage to any actor, state, proxy, or otherwise, capable of fielding low-cost, high-impact systems. This is not a flaw in the global system. It is the designated vector for predictable blowback. The strategic calculus is simple. By triggering a limited kinetic event, such as strikes on Iranian assets made politically viable by EU terror designations, planners do not expect a symmetric military response. They are baiting a solvency crisis. The target is not the opposing army. The target is the economic liability of defending a $5 million asset against a $500 threat, repeated at scale until the system breaks. The core theater of operations is not where the primary kinetic event occurs. It is where the consequences are engineered to land. To ensure a predictable outcome, strategic planners require live-fire test environments. These are designated gray zones, or proxy laboratories, nations selected for systemic stress testing. Analysts at institutions like CSIS monitor these zones not as isolated regional crises, but as controlled experiments. Recent instability warnings for nations like South Africa are not random political events. They are calculated vectors for testing supply chain disruption, social cohesion thresholds, and the psychological impact of rapid systemic decay. These laboratories provide the critical data for predictive modeling. They allow planners to measure the public's tolerance for shortages, calibrate the effectiveness of information controls, and refine the protocols for managing a solvency crisis before deploying them on the primary target, the domestic U.S. population. The staging is methodical. The data gathered from these proxy zones minimizes variables for the main event. It ensures that when the kinetic trigger is pulled, such as EU sanction strikes on Iran, the resulting asymmetric blowback on the U.S. homeland unfolds not as a chaotic surprise, but as a prescripted step in a larger blueprint for systemic reset. The bedrock of nuclear deterrence is a protocol known as launch on warning. This is not a policy of choice. It is a mathematical trigger. The instant early warning systems confirm inbound strategic assets. A retaliatory launch is initiated before the first impact. The logic is cold. Failure to launch means the total loss of second strike capability. The system is designed to remove human hesitation. This entire protocol is predicated on one fragile assumption: the integrity of the data from early warning radar and satellites. However, as documented by War on the Rocks, America's cyber weakness is a known, analyzed, and arguably self-inflicted liability. This is not an oversight. It is a designated systemic vulnerability. Now, inject an asymmetric cyber attack into this equation. The objective is not to destroy the radar, but to blind it. The commander in the bunker does not see an attack. He sees no signal. He sees ghosts on the screen. He sees corrupted data streams. CSIS analysis terms this the fog of digital war. The commander is now forced into a zero-sum calculation. Does he trust the silence, assuming it's a glitch, and risk the annihilation of his nation if he is wrong? Or does he follow protocol, assuming the lack of data is proof of a decapitation strike, and launch his assets out of fear? The cyber weapon doesn't deliver a kinetic payload. It forces the target to deliver it upon themselves. The final precondition is met. With key EU states signaling a reversal on the IRGC terror designation, the political architecture for a limited kinetic strike on Iran is now complete. According to reports cited by ICE Ponline, this move makes it legally easier to engage. This action is not a declaration of war. It is the deliberate tripwire for a pre-planned economic event. The objective is to provoke a predictable, asymmetric response. The system's architects have established two designated impact zones: an overvalued dollar, as noted by established financial institutions, and a systemic cyber liability. This vulnerability is not an oversight, it is a feature, a deliberately weakened firewall awaiting a catalyst. Analysts at War on the Rocks confirm this weakness is self-inflicted. The calibration shot is therefore a mathematical certainty. Before the main solvency event, a test of the system's response protocol is required. Within the next 12 months, anticipate a systemic, attribution impossible blackout targeting a primary U.S. maritime logistics hub. The vector will be a cyber attack on the terminal operating systems of the Port of Los Angeles/Long Beach, halting all container traffic for a 72 to 96 hour window. This is the launch on warning signal.